If you had coffee today, you have Ethiopia to thank. But if you had coffee that was grown anywhere outside of Ethiopia, you have Yemen to thank. The history of coffee's spread around the globe has a lot to do with the domestication and commodification of the crop, and that started in Yemen. When exactly the coffee plant crossed the Red Sea is unknown, but we do know that by about 1500 the brewed drink was already massively popular in the Arab world, even accounting for how quickly coffee's popularity has tended to explode when it reaches a new area. This suggests that the plant was in Yemen by the early 1400s or so, and possibly even earlier. In any event, with southwestern Ethiopia, the home of the coffee plant, being isolated and hard to access, Yemen was the dominant producer and trader of coffee for multiple centuries. It wasn't until the early 18th century that production was ramped up in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. But in a colonial era with European powers hot to exploit the rest of the world for goods and labor, and the popularity of the beverage taking off in many European cities, within a few decades coffee was being grown around the world in the tropical regions. This means that most coffee varieties grown around the world are at most about 300 years old. Meanwhile, coffee varietals from Yemen could be twice as old, and Ethiopian varietals older still. There are several aspects of Yemeni coffee that are particularly unique. First is the altitude. Some of the farms that produce the coffee included in the lot I'll be trying today are located at more than 2,400 meters above sea level, about as high as you'll find coffee growing anywhere in the world. The climate in Yemen is also substantially more arid than in most places where coffee is grown, and undoubtedly only the most resilient varieties of coffee Arabica have been able to thrive there. There's also the processing. As the arid climate would suggest, water is in relatively short supply in Yemen, so all the coffee I've seen out of the country has been naturally processed instead of washed, which means that the coffee bean is dried in the fruit rather than washed free of it. What this means is that a lot more of the fruit flavor is imparted into the bean as it dries, and therefore makes its way into the coffee end product. A recent study suggested that there is a group of Yemeni coffees that does not share genetics with any extant variety of coffee in the world, not even ones from Ethiopia. Whether this is because they derive from extinct varietals, or whether the coffees in Ethiopia with which they do share genetics were simply not included in the study is unclear. There are, after all, a lot of coffee genetics in Ethiopia. But what can be stated with some certainty is that Yemeni coffee is a different experience from the coffee you might be able to drink on any given day, even though the coffee you're drinking very likely wouldn't exist without it. This isn't the first time I've had Yemeni coffee, so I do have some expectation of the differences. But why don't we go ahead and find out what exactly those are? Yemeni coffee smells amazing. You really get a big cherry nose, if you will. A lot of that fruit, the cherry scent in the aroma. One of the first times I had Yemeni coffee, maybe the first time, I did a cupping and I was comparing it to, I think, a Rwandan coffee and then something from, I want to say Guatemala. At any rate, I got to the Yemeni coffee third, and the cherry was, I hadn't had a lot of naturals at that point, but the cherry was just incredible from an aroma standpoint. You also get a bit of some suggestions of tea, kind of black tea, and then a bit of chocolate. Obviously, Yemeni coffees were initially, I think, sort of known for kind of a chocolatey taste. That's what I've come to believe anyway, just based on the fact that the word mocha has been adapted to refer to like a chocolate coffee combination. And mocha is a port in Yemen, which was for many years a primary exporter of coffee, or the primary exporter of coffee for the world, for a couple of centuries before the plant itself spread outside of Yemen and then was subsequently grown elsewhere. But between 1500 and 1700 roughly, Mocha was a really dominant commerce center because of coffee. So that's always been my assumption. Now, the Yemeni coffees that I've had have not necessarily been super chocolatey, but the varietals that are still in Yemen, that are still grown there, are primarily heirlooms, whereas the ones that were maybe taken out and then subsequently expanded around the world, Typica and Bourbon. Typica in particular, I think, leans a little more chocolatey, and that was the first one to make it out. That was the one that went to India and then Indonesia, what is now Indonesia. So that's kind of my assumption, is that that was the one that was sort of gravitated towards initially by coffee consumers outside of the Arabian Peninsula, in particular European colonialists. Anyway, let's roll on into this. So I'm pretty excited. I haven't had a coffee from Yemen in a little while, at least probably 9 months, maybe longer, maybe closer to a year. Not a lot of coffee comes out of Yemen these days, so. Boy, there's almost a little bit of a perfume in there too. I mean, if this tastes half as good as it smells, it's going to be amazing. Like perfect drinking temperature right now too. Ooh. Good start. Nice pop of acid, and there really is kind of I think they mentioned malt on the bag as far as the tasting notes, and there really is that kind of a maltiness, sort of right under the acid. Wow. Is really aromatic. It's kind of almost like a fragrant wood, but kind of like a sandalwood, something very, very fragrant. So not woody, but with a real aroma to it. You see that sometimes in coffee, like cedar, sandalwood are frequently cited. I would kind of put this sort of in that category. It's not cedary, but maybe something like sandalwood. And then you got a bit of chocolate, then you got your fruit notes, and there's definitely some cherry. There's also kind of like a dried fruit, like a little bit of little raisiny. Wow. There's just so much going on. So many different notes, which that's my favorite thing about coffee, is I love to drink a coffee that has, most bags of coffee you buy, they will pick out 3. And 3 is good. But you start drinking a coffee, you start finding 4, 5, 6 different kind of notes that you're picking out. The flavor is sort of evolving as you're drinking it. It tastes a little bit different when it's hot as when it starts to cool down. This is what I think is one of the most fun things about coffee, because, coffee as a beverage, obviously it has, there's kind of a standard-ish coffee profile that I think we all think of. But in a lot of cases, that's kind of more about roast. And when you roast a coffee a lot lighter, what you get is you don't get any of the roast flavors. You get just enough heat applied to, mature and bloom all these flavor compounds that are in the bean without roasting them out and just turning them into, this tastes like roasted coffee. I mean, I think we all know what you can picture a taste when I say roasted coffee, right? Like there's just the thing that you think of. One thing that I found so interesting about coffee as I have started to really get into it is the way that just isn't true to a large extent. That's not what coffee has to be. It's really not what it is. I mean, what you're tasting, not to be too much of a snob here, but what you're tasting when you're tasting roast often is lesser quality coffee that had to be roasted to have enough flavor to justify drinking it. So this is why I got heavily into specialty coffee. So that's coffee rated 80 points or above. Usually mid to high 80s into low 90s or above, but you don't see a lot of those and they're probably very expensive. That kind of coffee does not have to be roasted to, medium dark, darker than dark to taste like something. And in fact, that would be a complete waste of its potential. This is a light roast. This is, we just got it there. And the flavors, some of them are what you would naturally associate with coffee, that little bit of chocolate, some of that dried fruit maybe. A lot of the flavors are not what you would necessarily associate with coffee. But it's incredible. It's an incredible product. And, I've had 3 or 4 coffees out of Yemen at this point. They're all incredible. I mean, it's an amazing experience. And if you're just used to drinking coffee from Starbucks, it's not an experience you've had. And so I would recommend to anyone, if you like coffee at all, beyond just viewing it functionally, I would suggest at least trying coffee out of Yemen, because it's such a different experience than pretty much anything you've had before. If you've had a natural, like from Ethiopia maybe, you're at least part of the way there. But Yemeni coffee, it's a different kind of environment than basically anywhere else coffee is grown. It's different varietals, all these heirloom varietals that, didn't really start in Ethiopia, or if they did, we don't know what they were, and didn't make it out of Yemen. So they've really only been cultivated there. They thrive in that climate, which most coffee, does not. The really dry region. It's just different. It's so different, but it's so good. So ParadiseRoasters.com, out of Minneapolis, they are the roaster from whom I received this coffee via their rare coffee subscription. And they are currently, as of this recording, still offering that lot a la carte. I believe it's the same lot. But at any rate, it's a very similar one from Yemen, if it's not the exact same one. So I imagine it has to still be worth it. I think it's $24.95 for 4 ounces, which, you will probably get, depending on the size of the pour that you're making, maybe between 4 and 6, pour overs out of that. I think it's worth it. I mean, we're talking like if you factor in shipping, that might cost you whatever, $6 or $7 per, which probably sounds like a lot, but if you think about what like a venti coffee at Starbucks runs you, it's at least $3-4, and this is more than twice as good as that, I think. I mean, no offense to Starbucks, we owe them a lot for helping to popularize coffee and getting us to a point where we could have, this third wave and fourth wave of coffee, the specialty stuff, but I don't really see myself going there very much, because you can't really get coffee like this there. And this is what I like now. It doesn't always have to be from Yemen. This is kind of a special experience. But, the good stuff. That's where I'm at in life. The good stuff. So if you're interested in trying coffee from Yemen, there are places you can find it besides Paradise. That's just where I happen to get this one, and they're still selling it. So feel free to check that out. I do have a referral code if you've never ordered from them before, which I will post in the description because I order from them a lot. This is not a paid endorsement or anything like that, as I say every time I mention this. It's just a product that I use. So, you may as well get free shipping. But yeah, so that's that. There are other places that sell Yemeni coffee. I cannot specifically vouch for those Yemeni coffees, but I'm betting they're probably pretty good. That's it for this episode of Rob's Coffee Journeys. A trip to Yemen. This is surely the only way I will ever get there, but it's a good way to do it, in my opinion. Certainly a flavorful way. I'll see you next time.